Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for Dr. Michael Wilcox's talk, MUWEKMA, Narratives, Sovereignty, and the Politics of Erasure. And thank you also for bearing with us. I know we're running a few minutes behind schedule, but we're so excited about today's talk and grateful for your participation. So I will begin with some very, very brief introductory remarks, and then I will hand it over to Dr. Michael Wilcox, and we'll save a portion of time toward the end for discussion. Dr. Michael Wilcox is a senior lecturer in the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity at Stanford, where he teaches in the program for Native American Studies. An anthropologist and archaeologist by training, Dr. Wilcox is the author of The Pueblo Revolt and the Mythology of Conquest, an indigenous archaeology of the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, published in 2009 on the University of California Press. In 2020, he also received the Departmental Award for Outstanding Teaching in Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. Like many universities and institutions, Stanford announces publicly that the university resides on unceded Native territory. But we might wonder about the substance of such proclamations. What do they really mean? And what might a fuller engagement with this history look like? His training in archaeology enables Dr. Wilcox to take a much longer historical view than many scholars on race are able to investigate. As we'll see in today's talk, Dr. Wilcox prompts us to think beyond the land acknowledgement, which runs the risk of being a routine articulation devoid of substance. In his research, teaching, and activism, Michael Wilcox asks us to think of Indigenous peoples, especially in the Americas, not as invisible or nearly extinct, but to ask instead how Indigenous groups have survived, how they are visible, and what their political imagination and historical experiences mean today. I very much look forward to hearing his thoughts on this matter and many more, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Wilcox. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaughn. It's great to see everybody in the Zoom space here. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see the screen? I can. Thumbs up. Okay, good. So I want to talk today a little bit about my work with the MUWEKMA tribe and of the San Francisco Bay Area. The tribe is in the process of seeking re-acknowledgement or federal recognition. And I'll talk about why that's so important to today and how their plight for recognition has been thwarted in some ways by the history of the lack of a historical narrative of their presence in the San Francisco Bay Area. So the MUWEKMA tribe is comprised, it's a constitutional tribal government. It represents 650 families who live in the Bay Area still and outside the surrounding areas. Their traditional homeland is the 9 counties of the Bay Area, but specifically Santa Clara, San Francisco, Alameda, Contra Costa, and let's see, those are the main counties and parts of yeah. So those are the main counties that are the traditional territory of the MUWEKMA. In my capacity as a scholar, I've worked with different tribes around the country, and one of the things that I've learned how to do is to apply the skills that I have as an archaeologist and as an historian in the service of Native peoples. And this is really an important part of the work that everybody in CSRE has some kind of commitment to change, an active commitment to change. So this is the chair and co-chair of the MUWEKMA tribe, Charlene Nijme and Monica Arellano. And I contacted them a couple of years ago because I was interested in working with them. And Stanford has a pretty rich relationship, long-standing relationship through Laura Jones, who predates my time here, 2001. Stanford was the first university in the country to voluntarily repatriate materials from its collections back to the MUWEKMA tribe. And that happened, I think, in 1989, before NAGPRA was passed. Like I said, Laura Jones is one of the people responsible for that, certainly. But the subject of repatriation is a sticky one, and I'm going to talk about why recognition is so important to Native peoples, especially the MUWEKMA. So this is what I do. So I work as an archaeologist, and construction sites all around the Bay Area uncover every single day burials that are parts of construction sites. Anytime there's a discovery made, the tribe has to have someone come out and help remove human remains and rebury them. And this is the site. This is in San Jose, downtown San Jose on 5th Avenue, right across from the Holiday Inn. It's one of the largest cemeteries that MUWEKMA has in this site of a village named Tamian. So you can imagine that if much of your day, much of your bandwidth as a tribal governor is to deal with the process of reburial and removal, that's a pretty grim way to spend your time. And as a constant reminder to me, as someone who works on these sites, that I'm always struck by how little people know about the presence of California natives, and particularly people in the Bay Area, and how much is being destroyed every single day. And my obligation as a scholar is to shine light on something larger than just the land acknowledgement. So I'm going to get going here. So I teach a class, Native People of California, and it focuses on the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, certainly the local history here. And I'm working on a book called MUWEKMA, Landscape History and Finding Home, in collaboration with the tribe. And part of my office is working with the tribe. I've done two things. One is to serve as a tribal historic preservation officer, or THPO. So I liaise with different agencies around the state, different agencies in the Bay Area for all kinds of projects that are important to them. So water management, burial removal, land access, all kinds of things. And in that capacity, in the past year, I co-founded a land trust for the tribe called the MUWEKMA Preservation Foundation. And I'll give you a link to that a little bit later. So the visibility of the tribe is super important, and we can always do a better job. So I'm going to take some time today to explain who the MUWEKMA are and this deep and rich history. Now, this starts everywhere for many people in CSRE. It's a personal story. And this is my great grandmother. She's about my age now. She's in this photograph, she's 53. And I just found this photograph a couple of years ago, but I remember her as a young person, and I was about 10 years old when she passed away. And one of the things that led me into what I do today, the work that I do, is the fact that her story and the story of my family, as someone from Yuma, Arizona, the tribe Arquitsan and Yuma, we live along the border of California, Arizona, and Mexico. And so our history is a lot like MUWEKMA in the sense that it's invisible. We're not really part of California, we're not really part of Mexico, we're not really part of Arizona. So entering into the school system and having no idea of what this history was led me to try and uncover other kinds of complicated but visible histories that we can access. Now, Rosa Carvajal's story is interesting and tragic in many ways, although she certainly was not a tragic person. Because of the vagrancy laws in the state of California that were in effect, the California Indian vagrancy laws, Native people who were not attached to property and were wandering around or found in public spaces could be conscripted for forced labor. And one of the ways that the state of California dealt with people who were landless was to arrest them and then put them into jails. And then after that, they were sold at like an open auction to the highest bidder. So the story of California natives, the story of the San Francisco Bay Area, is not a happy one. Even though San Francisco has traditionally been a progressive city, this is one of the most dark and difficult chapters for Native American history in all of North America. California is a catastrophe for Native peoples. It isn't a catastrophe in total because we are still here. And that's the story I want to tell today. And this photograph is a slide of something that was shown to me. I found in an archive in Berkeley, and it shows a young girl who's about 10 years old. And the author says in French at the top says that this is a woman. It's not a woman, it's a child who can be bought for the price of a bottle of whiskey. And knowing that my great grandmother lived for part of her life, she's revealed in the census as living by herself in a hotel makes this slide particularly poignant to me because it speaks to the history of sexual violence against women in California, and specifically with people in the Bay Area, because the same thing happens north of in the San Francisco Bay Area. One of the reasons why the tribe does not have a land base is because they were literally erased from the public sphere. And the frames of that are certainly very interesting as a scholar. But one of the things that I work on is this idea of a terminal narrative. So terminal narratives define what happens in settler colonial society. So we have 4 dimensions of that: disease-based population crashes, military conquest, missionization, and acculturation. Those 4 narratives, when you couple them all together, create an invisible population that needs to be that people need to rediscover. So part of my work is to undo our conceptions about what those 4 things do and reverse these terminal narratives and create histories that connect contemporary people to the past. Now, anthropology itself has this very difficult history with the MUWEKMA tribe. And this is Alfred Kroeber. He's the father of American anthropology, was at UC Berkeley. That department was founded through the efforts of Phoebe Apperson Hearst. Phoebe Hearst, I'm going to talk about later, she bought the property that the MUWEKMA tribe was on, the rancheria that they lived on in the 1800s. And I'll get into just kind of talk about why she did that. But she, after her property, the property that the MUWEKMA tribe was on was purchased, she created the Hearst Museum and helped found the Department of Anthropology. But for all that trouble, for all that the MUWEKMA tribe contributed to that legacy, this is what Kroeber had to say about the tribe. The Costanoan group, that's the MUWEKMA, is extinct so far as all practical purposes are concerned. A few scattered individuals survive whose ancestors were once attached to the missions San Jose, San Juan Bautista, and San Carlos, but they are of mixed tribal ancestry and live lost among other Indians or obscure Mexicans. So there's many layers of racism in there. But one of the legacies of Alfred Kroeber was that he was very interested in capturing and conveying to the American public the idea that Native peoples were vanishing. And that's part of the terminal narrative that anthropologists contributed, is that we would soon be extinct. And I jokingly say that we've been disappearing for over 500 years, which says something about what we mean by disappearance. Is it a wishful, is it an aspirational, or is it actually happening? Right. So Kroeber's legacy for California natives and for the MUWEKMA tribe was that he created the impression that there were no longer any Native people in this area. And he became very disinterested in them because he believed that they were too acculturated, one of the concepts I talked about earlier in the terminal narrative, to be of any useful value to anthropologists. So his legacy is certainly important. What are we talking about in the Bay Area? These are the tribal areas. You can see in the color, this is the Ohlone territory. These are dialects. They are not nations within that space. That whole idea is a projection of American nationalism upon the maps of the territories of Native peoples. That's another class subject. But there are 3 important missions that are mentioned in this, actually 4. The first is Mission San Francisco. The second is Mission San Jose. The third is Mission Santa Clara. And then the 4th is Mission San Juan Bautista. So the members of the MUWEKMA tribe descend from the people who were at those missions, brought into the mission system in the 64-year period when the missions were active in California. So the final mission that people were moved into is in Fremont, called Mission San Jose. That's where it says Chocheño, and there's a little cross there. Okay, why is that important? Because the MUWEKMA tribe becomes known as, after the mission system collapsed, they become known as the Mission Indians of San Jose. And naming is so important in this story because the way that they're noted and recorded in American documents, in American administrative documents, is confusing. So people don't know who this group is. And when the tribe went up for reaffirmation and sued the Department of Interior in court a few years back, one of the big questions is, who are you? And that's a problem. So they are the MUWEKMA tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area. And here shows you the language families, the traditional territories. So we know that there are large groups of people who are here. Now, this is a painting from 1831 that shows Native peoples outside of Mission Dolores in San Francisco dancing. Now, if you follow the normal history that I encountered as a young person, that you learned pretty quickly that Native peoples were extinct soon after the arrival of Europeans, and that is simply not the case. Native people live for a long period of time neighbors of Europeans, living and working on ranches throughout the Bay Area. And I'll talk about what they are. So part of what missionization brought was not just forcible conversion, but also the reduction in access to food. All right, so food sovereignty is part of the story of community health. One thing that I'm very interested in is not just the invocation of disease as this blanket statement that wipes out Native peoples, but what does that really mean? Did diseases wipe everybody out? Is disease, and should it be included in a conversation about access to food and clean water and health? And that's what I want to problematize in this work that I'm doing. Now, this is the area, this is an urban environment, right? So behind us behind this photograph here is Mount Diablo. Mount Diablo is the origins place for most Bay Area, California Native people. It is the place of emergence. And in the cosmology of the MUWEKMA, there's a hummingbird that goes down into the water and pulls up some mud and places it on top and keeps packing it on top until this point pops out of the ocean, right? You think, well, that's sort of allegorical and interesting, but what does that really mean? Well, one thing that the MUWEKMA tribe was witness to was rising sea levels over the course of the history of their occupation in California. So archaeologists would say that Native people in California are present in the earliest sites, and we don't really know where the earliest sites are, about 11,700 years ago. So that means that the MUWEKMA ancestors witnessed the formation of the Bay Area, right? Because the last ice age ends, the Bay Area is formed, the San Francisco Bay is formed in about 7,000 years ago when sea levels rise. And if you've driven around the bay, you probably wonder, well, where are the beaches? Where's the places to swim? And it looks like if you travel around Angel Island, if you're in a boat on one of those ferries, it looks like the sea level just popped up out of nowhere. And that's exactly what the MUWEKMA witnessed happen. So to the idea that Native peoples were incapable of understanding or dealing with change is a mythology. Right? So what does this look like archaeologically? What happens in this rich and deep history of the Bay? Well, we know that California natives are among the most wealthy groups of people in any tribal area in the country. And this is a map of shell mounds that were documented in the 1920s. Up until the 1950s, there were shell mounds in California, actually in the Bay Area. At the intersection of San Antonio Road and El Camino is this mound called the Mayfield Mound, 2.5 acres, about 40 feet high. And I have a student doing looking at old photographs of these mounds. The mounds are signals of wealth. They're platform mounds similar to those that are in the East and in the American Southeast. And it leads into our story of what Berkeley is involved in right now, why it's so important for MUWEKMA to be recognized, not only publicly, but federally. So what does a shell mound look like? Well, it's a burial place. It's also a marker that links people who are traveling in boats across the bay to the areas, the creeks, like the San Francisco Creek, all the way up into the mountains of the Santa Cruz Mountains. So those arteries, the creek systems of the Bay Area are linkage points between the bay, the mountaintops, and the ocean on the other side. And I'm involved in a research project to look at late occupation periods in California on Stanford's property. So what happens to these mounds? Well, a few things happen to them. One, archaeologists become very interested in excavating them. And much of the 100, I want to say, we don't really know how many skeletons how many ancestors that are controlled by Berkeley, but it could be between 80 to 100,000 people, right? That's a lot of people. And the ancestors, the ancestors of MUWEKMA, they've been estimated to be about 12 to 20,000 individuals who are held in the museum over there, right? So that's a problem. And where did they come from? Well, every construction project that happens around the Bay has, as part of its environmental impact report, an assessment of cultural properties. That's not where most of the remains come from. They came from sponsored excavations by University of California and people and other universities back east to document this phenomenon of shell mounds in the bay. Shell Mound Street in Berkeley is named after one of the largest shell mounds. Look straight out to the Golden Gate, and here's a photograph of that. Right, so the shell mounds are monumental architecture, kind of like a pyramid or a platform mound. Really important in the cosmology of the bay, and they link people in this famous Chorus watercolor by this fellow named Chorus, who documented people moving back and forth across the bay. This is going from Marin County over to San Francisco in one of these Thule canoes. So you can see that people are using the bay not as just an obstacle, but as kind of a freeway. Now, what else are California natives, especially in this area? We're thinking about environmental ecology and restoration for the MUWEKMA Preservation Foundation, is the restoration of traditional practices that deal with burning. If you've looked out into the mountains above Stanford, you see all those trees up there. I see a catastrophe waiting to happen because Native peoples routinely managed through fire ecology the mosaic of trees in the Bay Area, especially in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And they were forbidden from doing this beginning in 1795 by one of the earliest governors. Noticed that people were out in the fields burning to grow grasses, and he forbid them from doing so because he wanted cattle to be out there. Right? So very early on, Native traditional practices and access to food is interrupted. That's not disease, that's human caused, right? So what does that look like? Well, California grasses are adapted to fire. If you look at this little photograph here, the top right is a clumper. Those are California grasses. They're spaced out. They put out herbicides around them to keep other plants from growing so that when fire goes through, it doesn't burn the entire thing down. So these are fire adapted grasses that provided seeds and foodstuff for Native people. And this is what we have today, which is these are oats and wild oats that are introduced for cattle. Everything's very closely packed together. It is it's a fire catastrophe waiting to happen. Okay, so what are the other influences of the missions? Well, the missions occupy an outsized presence in the history of MUWEKMA, certainly. The mission system is only there for 64 years. In a long history of 11,000 years, it's a blip, it's a second, it's a blink of an eye. And Sarah's only here for a small portion of that time, but yet there's Sarah, there's missions everywhere in the American imagination about that talk about what happened, that characterize the story of Native Californians as decimated by diseases that are European introduced diseases. And one of the things that is left out of that story too frequently, and Barbara Voss wrote her thesis on this, is the idea that sexual practices, reproductive practices are interrupted through the mission system. So it's not the idea that Native people were unable to handle New World diseases is questionable. When you add to that the health profile and the interruptions of community health that were introduced by Spanish missionaries. We know that didn't wipe out everybody. The descendants of California natives are still here. How did that happen? That's our job. One thing that the missionaries did at the time was to put Native men and women into different barracks in the evening so that they couldn't procreate. There was no time or space for them. So the birth rate drops. They're in these tightly packed spaces, barracks, 20, 30 people, young women as young as from 10 years old on. We're in the women's barracks, the children were elsewhere, and the men are in another area. So very early on, you have opportunities for sexual abuse, for predation by people who are not looking out for the best interests of Native people. Okay, so what does a village look like in California in the Bay Area? Well, this is an artist depiction of this place called Carroste Valley. It's over on the coast next to Pomponio's Beach. I'll talk about Pomponio in a second. One thing that happens soon after the missionaries arrive is that they bring Native people by force into the mission system, but not all at once. It takes a long time for people to be brought in, and not everybody is there full time. They're outside of the mission system, able to go into the surrounding foothills to forage for food. to visit sacred sites and to continue to do practices that are shown in that painting from 1831. So when does this happen? 1769 is when the exploration of California by Europeans takes place. It's very late. 1540 is when things begin for Native people in North America. That's in Zuni, New Mexico, where I did some of my early field work. So California is much later. And why is that the case? Well, there wasn't really anything up here that was of interest to the Spanish. It's only the incursion of other forces, other Europeans into the Northern California area in Fort Ross, where Russian fur traders come down, that sparks this movement towards getting missionaries back into this area to found this mission system. So it's a fragile system. It doesn't work very well. And in the research I'm doing and looking at archives in San Jose, I've discovered that there are a great number of active and passive forms of resistance that take place in the missions in California, in the Bay. There are at least 4 major rebellions that take place. No one knows about this because they haven't been written about, right? So there are 3 related individuals directly related to the MUWEKMA. One is called Estanislao. Estanislao is a Yokut person who leads a rebellion in 1821 against the Spanish. He brings his party out into what's now the Central Valley, and he hides for a long period of time. He's never defeated, and he's brought back into the missions voluntarily in the 1831s at Mission San Jose. That's where the MUWEKMA are from. Pomponio in 1803 was a young person, about 19 years old, from Mission he was brought into Mission Dolores in San Francisco, and he leads this group called the Insurgents, Insurgentes, right? The insurgents who go up and down the San Francisco Bay Area and raid the missions for horses, for cattle, for food, and bring people out into the mountains, in the mountainous areas around Stanford University. Right, so there's a place called Pomponio's Cave, which is up by Highway 35. Yoshkalo is another person who's also one of these rebellion leaders. He directly related to the MUWEKMA tribe, listed in their own historical records. And another fellow named Zenon, Xenon or Zenon, who lead rebellions and active forms of resistance in the Bay. So what happens in the Bay Area has not really been articulated or recorded very well. It's difficult to find even a history of Native people in San Francisco Bay Area. So that's what I'd like to do in the next part of my career, is to document that phenomenon. All right, so the mission system is disbanded in 1824, and the mission system, the Spanish Empire falls. The missions, then there's a Mexican period where the Mexican government is in charge. Remember that it's way on the outskirts of where their territories are. They don't have much control over here, and things get pretty out of hand pretty quickly. That creates opportunities for Native peoples to move away from the missions and work for secular farms. And that's where they find refuge. That's where they find a place to live. That's where they find safety, by working for private landowners. Okay, so I won't get into the documentary history, but just want you to know that let's see if I can zoom here. Okay, so I'm going to show you this Pomponio slide while I get these other organized here. So what happens is, during the mission period, the Spanish don't really have complete control over their population. They're constantly writing back, worried about losing control, about parties of Native peoples who will raid the mission system and take people into the foothills. That's a history that most people don't know very much about. And what does it do? It creates a dualism, a duality within the mission system of people living in the hinterlands. That's where they find refuge, and people are recorded within the missions as being there full time. Right, so the mission system collapses, and after the Mexican government takes over, they start to partition and appoint colonial officials to oversee large tracts of land that were supposed to be given to Native Californians. So after a period of 10 years, the mission system was supposed to free was supposed to free Native peoples and let them be landowners. That didn't happen. There are two major areas that the MUWEKMA moved to in California. In the East Bay, they moved from Mission San Jose out to two ranches. One that's at Niles Canyon, which is on the way east to Lake Tahoe or to the Central Valley. The other is at Alisal, which is near Sonol, in a place called Indian Town. So those are the two major centers of population for the MUWEKMA people. And they lived there for a long period of time under the protection of this landowner named Bernal. And Bernal allows them to do whatever they want to do. They hold rituals, they continue their religious practices. They're kind of unmolested. And why does that happen? It's because of what happens in the San Francisco Bay Area is the gold rush doesn't just happen in the gold country. It happens on the peninsula, right? So all the people who are trying to get into California end up in San Francisco on the peninsula, and they start to displace using violence Native people who live in the area. So Governor Peter Burnett, soon after the missions are dissolved, this is only a couple of years later, launches this war of extermination against California natives. He's a kind of friendly looking fellow here. That a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected. While we cannot anticipate the result, but with painful regret, we regret that we're going to do this. The inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power of wisdom or man to avert. So what does white supremacy look like in California? It looks like this. The legacy of white supremacy is certainly real. And for Native California people, this is a difficult history, but it's followed with, soon after, by an anthropological endeavor that doesn't talk about violence very much. It avoids violence. It's not interested in that. And I want to just zoom over to here. Okay, so doing my research, looking at violence in California, one of the things I came across was this ad in a newspaper in Santa Cruz that says no more bounties for Indian scalps. The date is 1887. And it says the Board of Supervisors having refused to levy any tax for scalps in this county. Therefore, no more bills will be audited or paid on this fund. So no more bills means that they were being paid in California up until the 1870s, which means that if you look around the Bay, why are there no permanent settlements of Native peoples? It's because there was violence perpetrated against them. And the legacy of genocide includes the local area of San Francisco. In the process of doing research, I found that there were bounty lands that are still on maps recorded and awarded to people who took part in the Indian Wars and campaigns against Native Californians in the Bay. So what's blue, I think you can see part of that. They're little blue dots. Those are bounty lands awarded to soldiers who took part in the Indian Wars. So what does this look like for Leland Stanford? Leland Stanford presided over the raising of militias in his term as governor to wage war against Native Californians. So that's part of the story of Stanford. And he became a governor. He was a governor and then he became a senator after that. Certainly wasn't looking out for the best interests of Native Californians. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. So in 1850, the US government sent out Indian agents to California to negotiate treaties for lands that were supposed to be awarded to Native Americans. These are called the 18 Unratified Treaties. So about a third of the property of California was to be awarded to California natives. And there were the black areas show where the original reservations were supposed to be held. The party goes back to DC. They bring the treaties that are signed by all these Native groups, brought before Congress, and gold is discovered soon after. The treaties are locked in the National Archives for an undetermined period of time in the interest of national security. So when you look at a map of Native California today, there's no big reservations. Why? Because the unratified treaties were never signed. They were locked away in the interest of national security. So that's why we don't have big reservations in California, right? So what's the legacy here? Well, their unratified treaties mean that it's difficult for groups like MUWEKMA to assert a federal status with the federal government. The Indian agencies recognized the MUWEKMA tribe up until 1925, living on this ranch in the East Bay. They sent out an Indian agent named Kelsey who was supposed to purchase land for the MUWEKMA tribe. At that time, it was called the Verona Band of Mission San Jose Indians, the Verona Band. Verona is the name of Phoebe Apperson Hearst's estate. Remember that she purchases this big ranch that they're on. There's a mysterious fire that burns through the reservation. And Phoebe Hearst establishes, soon after this, she starts collecting implements and artifacts to found the Hearst Museum at UC Berkeley, right? So the Unratified Treaties, what happens is when Kelsey comes out, he's unable to find people in the East Bay or anywhere in the Bay who are willing to sell property to the tribe. So why are they a landless tribe? Because no one wanted to sell them any property in 1925. No one wanted to do that work. No one wanted to give them any money, any property at all. So they're a landless tribe, and that's part of their plight. So what does violence look like? Between 1849 and 1870, it's conservatively estimated that over 9,400 California Indians were killed and acts of enslavement took place during that time. So I'm going to skip ahead here. Got to find this one slide. Okay, I'll just leave it on the bounty lands. No one's willing to sell any property to the tribe after 1925. Now, the Bureau of Indian Affairs gives the MUWEKMA tribe Bureau of Indian Affairs enrollment numbers. They have numbers. But soon after that, the state of California has an Indian agency in Sacramento, and they just stopped doing their job. They're not interested in purchasing any land for the MUWEKMA tribe. So the tribe starts to organize itself and continues to live in the East Bay and works towards the protection of traditional cultural properties. So they still are on the lands in the East Bay. They still live there for the early and mid 20th century. They're organized as a group. They have dances. They have rituals. They have all the things that a government needs to have to survive, to be recognized by the federal government. And they organize around the protection of burial grounds. So Highway 680 runs right through the middle of one of these, a very large cemetery. And as a result of their efforts, they're able to protect, to divert Highway 680 and protect this traditional area, right? So what does the state of California do to address the injustice that was visited upon Native Californians, then the MUWEKMA tribe? Well, they try to give them checks for $668. And this one is from 1972, right? For the purchase, it's supposed to be for the loss of lands in the San Francisco Bay Area, $668. Now, some people cashed them because they needed money, but most of these checks went uncashed. And what I'm going to leave you with today is this other problem that MUWEKMA is dealing with, and that is the repatriation of their remains back into their control. So the University of California, Berkeley, in this very kind of twisted, kind of difficult history, Phoebe Apperson Hearst hires someone, creates the Department of Anthropology at UC Berkeley, hires somebody, Krober, to develop a department and to found a museum designed to record these people's histories of California history, California Native American history. And what's ironic is that her estate, the ranch that she bought that the MUWEKMA tribe was on, is called Verona. She builds a large estate there. And the workers who labor on to create that estate are called the Verona Band of California Mission Indians. So the Verona Band are the workers who actually built her mansion. And rather than looking after the living descendants, the living people that she knew much about, she created a museum to collect information and the artifacts from, she created a museum to record and collect artifacts and protect and care for those. Rather than look after the people, she was interested in these objects. So the legacy of that for the MUWEKMA today is that there is an effort to allow them to repatriate their remains, but they do not have currently under the federal law, federal acknowledgement status because of administrative error. Someone stopped communicating with them. And what they're involved in right now is seeking a process, or they're involved in a process of reaffirmation. What does that mean? It means that they have, under current repatriation law, they have to be a federally recognized tribe in order to receive their human remains and all the other artifacts. There's about 500,000 artifacts at UC Berkeley. About 19% of them have been returned to tribes. None of them have gone back to the MUWEKMA tribe. So what do they need? They need land. They need land. They don't need land to visit and gather. They need land to live on. And one of the things that the MUWEKMA land trust that I'm creating is interested in doing is creating spaces for people, not just to repatriate and rebury 12 to 20,000 ancestors, but also a place to live, a place to have communal gatherings, a place to build housing. So the activism that when I talk about land acknowledgements being a first step, the second part of it and the third part and the fourth part are involving this, is elevating the presence of the MUWEKMA tribe and their history to the Stanford community. The tribe is still here. They're actively participating as a partner with state, federal, and local agencies, but they don't have land. And I think that's an important part of this story, is to recognize that telling the story, and I've skipped through a whole lot of things here in my effort to be hit all the points. Telling the story is just as important as anything else for them. And that one thing that I'd like to see Stanford do is to require everybody to know something about the MUWEKMA tribe, to participate as your employee training, to learn about who the tribe is, and not just look at a land acknowledgement as something that provides a statement. Super important, but what else can we do to fulfill our obligation? That's the obligation that the land acknowledgement sets in place. What can we do to help the MUWEKMA tribe? So I think that's about it for me. I'll take questions or any other things that you have to ask or comments.
Okay, thank you, Michael, so much for that really illuminating talk. Such absorbing material and really important at this particular moment. So at this point, I invite everyone to join in a conversation, to ask questions. Please do use the hand raise function on Zoom to ask your question. You know, this is just a casual sort of Zoom meeting format. It's not a webinar. So I invite you to pose your question. And if you would rather not, you can also ask your question on the chat. But I'll take those raised hands first. We have Professor Paula Moya. Would you like to pose your question?
Sure. Hi, Michael. Let me just say how interesting and disturbing I found all that you had to say. So not surprising, because, you know, with the history of how Native peoples have been treated in this country, it's not surprising. But, you know, it's that kind of thing of just not knowing, you know, like I just didn't know. And, you know, you figure there used to be Native people here. You don't really know why they aren't. And so, you know, of course, as you were talking, I was thinking of a lot of different things I've read, including Tommy Orange. So I'm wondering what, you know, where he fits into that. And then I also was thinking about your first book about the Pueblo Revolt. So I'm much more familiar with, you know, Native presence in New Mexico because I'm from New Mexico. And so I'm kind of wondering, I mean, there's many, many questions I have, but one question is, did you go to do the New Mexico project in part because that was a project that you knew a little bit about, and so you could go deeper, as opposed to, it kind of sounds like you're having to like sort of a bit start from scratch in figuring out what the experience of Native people were here, like without a historical record, except one that tried to have these terminal narratives.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming. It's a busy time. People are zoomed out, so I appreciate everybody coming and participating. So my grandfather told me that the crossing to come north into California, my grandfather is Elmore Wilcox. He's the daughter of Rosa Carvajal. He would never wanted to talk about anything. He's just like, I don't have time. I don't, you know, this is like, you know, we just want to leave that behind, right? But he did say that the reason why settlers never came north into California over from Mexico is because the Colorado River crossing was controlled by Yuma, and that they had a rebellion and that they'd expelled the Spanish from the mission. There's no mission in Yuma, Arizona. And he said, and I got very curious about that. So there's a rebellion. There are rebellions in California. So I became interested in that. And then to discover that, the reason why it took so long to get into California, 1769, is because the crossing was closed. The Colorado River was not accessible. And so I became interested in rebellions, and it was kind of an accident. Then in grad school, I ran into this person who was studying the Pueblo Revolt, and it got me thinking about the concept of resistance and narratives of contact. So rather than explaining our disappearance as a group of people, why do we not construct narratives of presence? And the reason why is because these four insurmountable kind of blocks divert our attention from the fact of from the actual presence of Native people. So I became interested in applying that in different areas. And California is where I grew up in Redwood City. And I had no idea. It's embarrassing that I didn't know and never spoke to a MUWEKMA Ohlone person until I was 45 years old. I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And then as a scholar here, working, well, it might have been a little earlier than that. Maybe when maybe I ran into Rosemary Canberra early on, but I didn't have a conversation with anybody until I met Charlene and was invited to help them out. That says something, right? So I felt like I need to tell the story not only of what happens in Yuma, what happens in New Mexico, but did that happen here? And the truth is, yes, it did happen here. It's not just the missions come and then everybody disappears. There's a very complicated and very interesting history. So part of the project involves translating 600 documents from the Pueblo of San Jose, the first capital of California. One of the first governors, Pio Pico. A lot of people don't know he's a native person, right? He's an Apache ancestry. And one of the things that he does is there's a large administrative record that was going to be tossed out. So this friend of mine, Gustavo Flores at San Jose State, I started to hire him to translate documents about the rebellions, and that's part of this project I'm working on. Once we got the documents translated, we looked for evidence of where are people in the Bay Area. We found that there are sites right above Stanford that date from 1510 to 1870. So there are people up in the hills right above Stanford working on ranches. And that's what happens is people change their identity from Native to Hispanic.
Right.
They adopt Mexican names and they become Mexican.
Yeah.
And that's a part of the ethnogenesis and reaffirmation process they've dealt with with such difficulty for a lot of Native people with Native ancestry in California, is that you have to undo this idea that they're just Mexicans. That's what Kroeber wrote them out of existence, using the idea that just think about that, the idea of what's a lost, obscure Mexican. What is that all about? How could you be an anthropologist and talk about a group of people as obscure or lost? It just says so much about the state of anthropology. But the impact is that was great for MUWEKMA because they were not recognized as a real group of people for so long.
Thank you.
I hope that answers that.
Yeah, no, totally does. I mean, I could go on and on, but I'm not going to. I saw somebody had a question. I don't know where she went, but she should come back.
So I did see a hand up by, I believe it was Danny Carlson. I don't know if you're still interested in asking a question, but I did notice your hand up.
Yes, hi, it was me. Thank you so much for such an interesting and engaging talk. My question was mainly actually summed up very well by Belinda's message in the chat about how can we shift the narrative of Stanford and work towards having everyone at the university or have them be required to know more about the MUWEKMA Ohlone tribe. But also my question wanted to build on that and furthermore and ask, what responsibility does Stanford have to give land back and to make good in its land acknowledgement, like furthering it, making it a reality? Thank you.
Okay, that's a super good question. I would like to push Stanford a little further than they want to go. I'd like to make that happen. I think that educational, there are ways to educate the public about MUWEKMA Ohlone tribe, the MUWEKMA Ohlone tribe. Having the land acknowledgement is a big first step. Trust me, that's a big deal publicly to acknowledge this group of people, but it opens the door to other conversations that I think we should be having as a university and as people who live in California, right? So what can you do? Well, so in my intro to CSRE class that I'm going to jump on and lecture in a couple of minutes, part of our community engaged learning section, one of the sections, which is the largest one, I think we have 35 students want to do it, is to create social media awareness about the tribe and to kind of promote and platform the history of the tribe for a larger group, segment of the population. So we're figuring out in collaboration with the tribe how to work at kind of a different level to educate people about, if they're going to do a land acknowledgement and they've never spoken to the tribe, here's some material you can use. And that's what I'd like to do. There's a lot to do. And in my intro to, like, I also have a class about MUWEKMA, and students have individual projects. They've created packets for K through 12 school people. We documented the location of shell mounds. We've done a lot of individual projects that I'd like to get students involved in as community-based participatory research within CSRE to advance this very important work. I think there's a real opportunity there.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And so I will follow up with a question from the chat. Have other states or areas used a reparation model, and would that work here? I mean, do you know of the existence of models of reparations, reclamation that have been successful? Something that maybe could be emulated in our region?
Okay, so that's a really great question. What can you do? So there is a phenomenon developing in the environmental justice and movement it's called land back, which is it's a movement to try and give land back to tribes, right? So that opens this door of possibility, right? What do reparations look like? No one wants to touch reparations. No one wants to get near that, because if you look at those land transaction histories, there's a deep, many layers of title, of title changes, right? So what could you do? Well, the state of California owns a bunch of land. The San Francisco Public Utility District owns a ton of land in the Bay Area. UC Berkeley owns a ton of land. I think we can put pressure on them to at the very least, provide a space for the reburial of these ancestors. That's a human right. Control over your dead is a basic human right that's been denied them because of their lack of federal status. So the idea of what a land trust can do as a legal mechanism is it can receive property. It's very difficult to give property to tribes, especially non-federally recognized tribes. The state recognizes them. So what do? Well, this phenomenon of a land trust is an option because it provides a fundraising a dimension to the organization. So you have the Amamutsan Land Trust is a perfect model. Some of you have heard of it. It's down south. Their area is a little further south than the Bay. But what could you do? I think, well, it just started. It's a lot of work. It's getting going, but I think there are opportunities for students to get involved with the land trust in environmental education, in rematriation, educating the public about the history of the tribe, and moving, creating awareness about the interaction of Native people in the Bay with the land that they've been moved out of for so long. So I think there's definitely work to do there, but reparations there's no model of that anywhere.
So there are some questions and comments in the chat, but I want to just ask if is there a hand up that I don't see, or does anyone want to ask a question?
I wouldn't mind it if he would come back to Tommy Orange.
To come back to.
So yeah,
okay.
Tommy Orange, there.
Tommy Orange is a amazing author, right? So I assign him in my classes. But so Tommy Orange is not a native Californian person. He's from a different tribe. I don't remember exactly what one, but he lives in the Bay Area, so he's urban. And he creates this really important space. Well, anyway, his identity is kind of it's not MUWEKMA is what I'm trying to say. But what he does is he says, look, we are a real people. We're a real group of people. We're part of this urban environment. And what I really love about his work is he says, these stones, these freeway overpasses, that's indigenous space. It just looks different. And we are a people who are geared towards and built towards adaptation and a notion of change that is dynamic. So when I talked about the rising sea levels, people talk about, well, Native people couldn't handle these changes. Seriously, if you watch the entire sea level rise in the history of your tribe, you are adaptable by your nature. You are an adaptable group of people. You are used to dealing with and accommodating vast environmental changes. And this thing that we are in right now that we call modernity is part of that story. It is not outside of the Native experience. And that's what I love about Tommy Orange's work. He says, this is it. You're not going to be any more indigenous than you are right now. This is it. This is the maximum, right? And reclaiming those spaces not as partitioned off is really important. And also to look at, in Berkeley, there's the Cafe Aloni, which has Vince Medina and his partner, Luis, run this thing called gastrodiplomacy, where they reintroduce foods using modern recipes about the food of the Bay Area, food of California natives. And it's fantastic. It's like an 8-course meal. It takes like 2 hours. It's kind of expensive. I brought 10 students out there a couple of years ago and it almost broke the bank, but it's totally worth it. So look up Cafe Aloni. And he's very much interested in talking about the urban dimension of nativeness is not something that's inauthentic or strange, but something that is real and that we can embrace. The opening paragraph, the opening chapter of his book is one of the best, most amazing pieces of writing about Native people in contemporary society I've read in a long time.
I don't see any hands up, but anyone please correct me if I'm wrong. But Michael, would you be willing to say a little bit more about how Native languages fit in this picture? You mentioned 5 languages that are spoken predominantly in the Bay Area, and I mean just the incredible thrust of your presentation. Countering first of all this myth of Native extinction, disappearance, and replacing it with narratives of presence. It's really compelling, as I think all of our questions and comments suggest. And I am wondering about languages and linguicide, the phenomenon of the either slow or rapid death of languages, and how does is there a comparable mythology around languages, but Native languages? They still exist, they're still spoken, but my sense is that they are diminishing, and they're very hard to. Languages can be revived, but it's hard to do so once the last remaining speaker ceases to exist. So, could you just kind of say a little bit more about that in question?
Yeah, that's a great topic. It's a whole other topic, which and I borrow a lot from my scholarly friends who live in Hawaii, my Native Hawaiians friends who work on this very specific topic. So Hawaiian language was supposed to be extinct in the 70s. The idea was that there are only a few speakers left. It was a bunch of baloney, right? The truth is that the language goes underground, and that happened for the MUWEKMA. There are native language speakers who are fluent today. And one thing that the Preservation Foundation can do is to create a system of exchange. Now, where's that going to happen? Is it going to happen on a Zoom screen? Maybe. But where it does happen is on the land, where people talk about plants, they talk about history, they talk about connections, they talk about food. And because that's kind of a neutral space, it's not fraught with a lot of the dimensions of language learning, it becomes a natural place for the awakening of language or the reawakening of language. And that's happening for MUWEKMA. But they need a place, they need access to property. So they need a land base to work and do do that kind of work. It is totally possible. This happens. But in a lot of other tribes who are thought to have their language be completely gone, and what it is, it's possible to awaken languages. It's going to be of course, different. I mean, Jonathan's not here, but he could talk about the importance of language being not something that's, you know, that's either or, but it's a binary, the old language and the new language. It's dynamic. It's going to change. It's going to have different structures in it. But there is a movement with MUWEKMA to pair the language speakers with young people. It has to happen with young people, and that's the hope of the Preservation Foundation, is that you can create. Look at the little one there. So you can create opportunities for people to get together and talk, right? So it's possible. It is possible.
So, Michael, I have another question that's kind of more of a a scholarly question, which is that so the name, you traced a lot of name changes over the years.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I could follow them, so that was great. But it's clear that there was a lot of displacement and movement. And I'm just wondering, the name that we're using right now, MUWEKMA Ohlone, is this a name that say the people who are displaced from where Hearst, where Hearst pushed them off the land, and that would they recognize that name? I mean, how do we? I'm not saying that they have to be for us to be interested. I'm just kind of curious about that.
That's a huge issue, Paula. Right. So when they're recorded by the federal government, they're called the Mission Indians of. They're called the Mission Indians of the Mission San Jose of Mission San Jose. Mission Indians of Mission San Jose. Right.
That was a Spanish imposition or Mexican imposition or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, and then they're moved over to this other area, and they become called the Verona Band after the train stop that unloaded Phoebe Hearst supplies. So because they're workers there, they just call them the Verona Band. So what is the bigger question is what's Ohlone, what's MUWEKMA, what's that mean? Ohlone means people of the West. So that came from people from the East, okay, who said, who are those people? Those are the Ohlones. Those are the people from over there. Ohlone is also a name that's recorded in the mission registries. It refers to a small village on the coast near San Gregorio Beach called Ohlone, right? So that's I think where they get the part of that name, but it's all mixed up, right? So what do? MUWEKMA decides probably, I think in the late 1970s, early 80s, just call themselves the people. And that's what MUWEKMA means. So would it be recognizable in that language? Yes, it would just mean the people.
Okay, but it's a more current name. It's a more contemporary name. So the people of the West, more or less.
That's what Ohlone means.
I see.
But MUWEKMA just means the people.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, most people around the world call themselves the people.
Or the good people.
Yeah, right. It's just so everybody else is always the other, the barbarian, whatever. So,
yeah. So that's amazing. Yeah. So usually it means those people over there, or it's a pejorative. It's kind of strange. So the Pima, who are next to Yuma down in Arizona, the name Pima means. The Spanish explorer came, found a bunch of people working in a field. He said, "Who are you? Who are you?" And they say, "Pimas, Pimas," which means, "I don't understand what you're saying," right? So that group becomes the Pima Cotton, the Pima tribe. It means, huh?
Yeah.
So at least it's a kind of a generated language from contemporary people. And I think we have to let people call themselves what they want to be today. And even if it's not what would have been recognized in the past, there isn't really any kind of collective notion of personhood that looks like the Navajo tribe. Even that one is problematic. That looks like a nation state, which is what the federal government requires, that you look like something like them to be organized and recognized. Right. That just was their bands, their families. There are 11 lineages that MUWEKMA people are descended from that come straight from the mission. So it's really family groups who've been required to organize themselves in a way that's recognizable to the state, to the nation state. So would it be recognized? No, they would say their village. That's how they identify themselves.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think we have time for one more question, maybe two. Does anyone have a question before we wrap up? I have one, but
I think Laura's there.
Yeah, Laura, please.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Michael, I know that often for recognition, one of the things that the feds look for is language. And I wondered, given all the scattered history, is there a MUWEKMA Ohlone language that can be preserved or presented?
Yeah, actually, they don't require language. The federal recognition process doesn't require a language that there be an active spoken language. What they do require is a consistency of governance. So is there something does a tribe govern itself internally? And they do, and they did through a system of godparenthood. So how are they tied together? Well, there are these offices called capitans. The capitan, the last capitan was in the mid 20th century and lived at this ranch, Alisal, in the East Bay. So the capitans are there, but the descendants of that person are Charlene and Monica, all those folks there. So a language is an important part of it. There should be a continuity of governance. There has to be a consistent occupation of Aboriginal territory. And there has to be a direct cultural continuity, so that people are required to demonstrate that they're doing the same things through the years. So we've had to document the MUWEKMA Ohlone were participants in the ghost dance in the 1870s. There are ghost dance areas in the East Bay. There is a potential one in the peninsula. I'm not going to say where it is, but there's a plaza that looks like a ghost dance area. That's a California phenomenon, by the way. It came from the Owens Valley, but spread throughout California, then went all the way to the plains where it became very famous. So you have to demonstrate a continuity of cultural practices too. So yeah, hope that answers the question. Anela?
Yeah, so I kind of just had a quick question about, you kind of talked about how tribes are forced to kind of present themselves in a way that's like recognizable. So I had a question about like maybe in like federal recognition processes, I know there's a lot of like dispute over like this tribe or this band claimed this area, and then sometimes like there's a gray area between I guess just like, especially in the sense that tribes can be like nomadic and like they're not set to one space. And I guess I'm just curious if you had any thoughts on that as far as like in the Bay Area, if there's any issues with like overlap and like tribal interests, I guess.
Yeah, so there are descendant families who are out there who say I'm Ohlone, but they're not really part of the governance. The government has been intact since the early 20th century. I mean, it goes way back. You have to show that continuity. And it's in terms of connection, the idea that Native people are kind of nomadic and don't really kind of wandering around like in space is not true. The creek system in the Bay Area, the line that moves water from the top of the mountains down to the bottom, those areas were controlled by particular bands of people for a long period of time. So that the shell mounds mark territories. If you went around the bay on your Thule Reed boat, you would see posts in the air with feathers that would mark your entrance into someone else's territory. That goes back several thousand years, and it's intact up until the Berkeley shell mound in the late 1800s. That's the last one that's kind of occupied. Actually, there was one occupied by someone in a family at Coyote Point. There's a shell mound right there, and the person's referred to as Indian Joe, and it's kind of really ridiculous, but it's a Native guy who's still with his family living in that area, protecting the shell mound. So deep continuity in terms of connection to land is real. That's another thing. Are there other competing claims on this territory? This is an important thing. So once the recognition process starts, people start doing land acknowledgements. People come out of the woodwork and they'll say, I'm MUWEKMA Ohlone. And there's like a couple of groups, I'm not going to name them, who claim to be speaking for a group of people. And it's really just a family or a couple of people who create a website that looks great, but it's not a tribe. A tribe has specific criteria that are necessary to be met. And the MUWEKMA Ohlone tribe's been together for a long time. As a matter of fact, the people who claim to be another tribe or another group or website are lineal descendants from those 11 families the 11 lineages that came out of Mission San Jose. So then we have gaming. We didn't talk about gaming. One of the big obstacles for federal recognition is Dianne Feinstein. She does not want to have a tribe recognized in the San Francisco Bay Area because she's afraid of gaming. And I don't think she's afraid of gaming. I think she's probably receives funding from lobbyists from other gaming communities in the state. So that's a big obstacle for them. What she has said, that there will never be a tribe in the Bay Area. It's just strange, right? You think she's this lefty person. No, 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 no. No, Democrats are not always really good to Native peoples. I wish I could say it's different, but it is not the case. And she's been a major obstacle and just in keeping the tribe from being recognized because of other interests that she sees as paramount. Think about, it's billions of dollars we're talking about. It's not a small deal. If there was recognition and they were allowed to build a casino, that's not what they're about, but that's what the fear is. Why would you go to Las Vegas? Why would you drive out into the Central Valley to go to a casino? So people are worried about that, and they're being lobbied against, even by their neighbors. Unfortunately, that's just a fact.
Thank you.
Well, what an incredible talk. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. And I want to thank everyone here who attended and joined for this rich discussion. It feels like a beginning rather than an end. You know, I am very grateful for you, Dr. Wilcox, to leading this conversation and heightening awareness surrounding Native studies, the indigenous peoples of California and the Bay Area. There's a lot to be done. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And enjoy your day.
Thank you, Michael.
Well done. Thanks.